My name is Corey Anderson, and at 32 years old, I never expected to be publicly humiliated by my own father. As a military officer who chose a different path than what my dad demanded, I learned to live with his disappointment. But nothing prepared me for that retirement dinner when he mocked me in front of his entire command, telling me to leave before I embarrassed him with my supposedly low rank. What happened next changed everything. Before I continue this story about family betrayal and unexpected vindication, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing tall when family tries to tear you down. Growing up in the Anderson household meant living with military precision. My father, Harold Anderson, was a career Army officer who believed rank determined a person's worth. From the moment I could stand, Dad expected me to follow his exact footsteps without deviation. Our family lived on various military bases across the country, moving every few years as Dad received new assignments. Despite never rising above lieutenant colonel, my father carried himself like a 4-star general at home. Mom played peacekeeper between Dad and us kids. Sarah Grace Anderson, with her soft voice and diplomatic skills, somehow managed to smooth over the constant tension Dad created. When he would berate me for not meeting his standards, she would later slip into my room with words of encouragement, though never directly contradicting his authority. My older brother James and younger sister Amanda quickly learned the path to Dad's approval. James followed Dad into infantry, taking the traditional advancement track that Dad respected. Amanda chose military medicine, which Dad deemed acceptable because it came with officer status and clear rank advancement. Both received Dad's rare smiles and occasional proud declarations at family gatherings. I was different from the beginning. While Dad focused on following orders without question, I was fascinated by military strategy and unconventional approaches. At age 8, when Dad brought me to an Army museum, he pointed to the displays of heroic soldiers following orders in famous battles. Meanwhile, I was captivated by the strategic maps and battlefield innovations that had changed warfare throughout history. "Stop wasting time with that theoretical nonsense," Dad snapped when he found me studying a tactical display for too long. "Real soldiers execute orders, not question them." That pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I was 12, I built a complex battlefield model for my school science fair, demonstrating how terrain affected historical military outcomes. Dad attended only briefly, visibly uncomfortable with my project. Military success comes from discipline and following the chain of command. He lectured on the drive home, ignoring my blue ribbon. "All that strategic thinking is for generals, not for regular officers. Know your place, Corey." By 15, our relationship had deteriorated into a Cold War. I still respected the military and wanted to serve, but my vision of service differed dramatically from his. While he valued rigid adherence to tradition, I studied innovative military leaders who changed history by thinking differently. This fundamental disagreement created a divide that widened with every passing year. During high school, my bedroom became a sanctuary of military history books and strategic game simulations. Dad would walk past, shaking his head at what he considered wasteful activities. When I joined the debate team instead of JROTC leadership, it triggered one of his legendary lectures. "You think you know better than generations of military tradition," he said, pacing my bedroom like he was addressing an underperforming platoon. "This attitude will destroy any chance of a respectable military career." No successful officer questions the established path. Mom would attempt intervention, gently suggesting, "Harold, perhaps Corey has his own strengths to contribute." Dad would invariably respond, "Sarah, you're undermining his development." There is only one proven way to succeed in military service. My 18th birthday dinner became the battlefield for our most significant confrontation. As cake was served, Dad announced he had arranged for me to meet with his infantry commander about following his recommended career track after college. I took a deep breath and replied, "Thank you, but I plan to apply for the intelligence and strategic operations track." The silence that followed was absolute. Dad's face flushed red as he processed this direct challenge to his authority. "That is a waste of your potential," he finally said, voice dangerously quiet. "Paper pushers and analysts never become real leaders. You will regret this decision." "I need to follow my own path," I responded, maintaining eye contact despite the tension coursing through my body. "Then you will fail without my guidance," he declared, standing abruptly. "When you come crawling back after washing out, remember this moment of disrespect." He left the table without finishing his cake, and our relationship was never the same. That night, alone in my room, I made a silent promise to myself that I would succeed on my own terms, even if my father never acknowledged my achievements. The following months were filled with cold interactions and minimal conversation as I prepared college applications. When acceptance letters arrived, including one to my father's alma mater, I chose instead a university with a renowned strategic studies program. Dad did not speak to me for weeks after I announced my decision. On the day I left for college, Dad offered his final advice. "When you inevitably fail at this foolish path, remember, the Anderson name means something. Try not to dishonor it completely." Those words burned into my memory, fueling a determination that would carry me through the challenges ahead. I did not yet realize how completely our paths would diverge, or that years later, his words would return in an even more public and painful setting. My enrollment in the military academy marked the beginning of true independence from my father's shadow. While he had pushed for the traditional infantry officer path at his preferred institution, I chose the academy known for its innovative approach to modern warfare. During orientation week, when other cadets shared stories of proud family military legacies, I remained quiet about the friction in mine. The specialized training in strategic operations and intelligence immediately felt right to me. Where others struggled with the abstract thinking and complex scenario planning, I thrived. My instructors noticed my aptitude for seeing patterns and predicting outcomes that others missed. By the end of first semester, I was already being tracked for advanced placement. During my second year, Commander Jackson entered my life and changed its trajectory forever. Tall and imposing with penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate everything simultaneously, he approached me after witnessing my solution to a tactical simulation that had stumped most senior cadets. "Anderson," he said, reviewing my results, "you think differently than most officers I encounter." Conditioned by years of my father's criticism, I stiffened, preparing for disapproval. "That," he continued with a rare smile, "is exactly what modern warfare requires. Traditional thinking creates traditional results, which are increasingly insufficient." That conversation led to mentorship that opened doors I never knew existed. Commander Jackson recognized that my approach to military problems came from a fundamentally different perspective than most officers trained in the conventional system. Under his guidance, I was selected for specialized programs typically reserved for officers with years more experience. "Your father is Harold Anderson, correct?" he asked one day, as we reviewed an assignment. "Yes, sir," I replied, tensing automatically. I served with him briefly, very dedicated to tradition. His neutral tone revealed nothing of his opinion. Sometimes, the most difficult thing for a military family to accept is a new way of thinking. He never brought up my father again, But that conversation confirmed he understood the family dynamic that had shaped me. My first classified mission came during my final year of formal training. The details remain confidential, but my strategic assessment of an emerging threat situation led to a successful operation with minimal resources. When I returned, my academic file received a special commendation that could not be shared publicly. That began the pattern that would define my career. While my fellow officers received medals and public recognition for their achievements, my work increasingly fell under classified designations. My promotions came rapidly, but quietly. Within 5 years, I had advanced through ranks that typically required twice that time. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family deteriorated further. Holiday calls became brief and formal. When asked about my military progress, I gave vague answers that my father interpreted as confirmation of mediocre achievement. Still pushing papers in that strategic division? He would ask during our rare phone conversations. Yes, sir. Still in the same department? I would answer truthfully, omitting my rapid advancement and increasing authority. James made captain last month, he would inevitably inform me. Unnecessarily. Command track. Of course. Real leadership. After one particularly difficult Christmas call, I confided in my colleague and friend, Captain Thomas Roberts. Why not just tell your father your actual rank? He asked as we reviewed security protocols for an upcoming operation. He would never believe it without explanation, I replied. And I cannot explain the work that led to these promotions. The truth was more complicated than security clearances. Some part of me, wounded by years of dismissal, wanted validation earned on my own terms. I wanted to succeed so completely that even my father would have to acknowledge my path had been valid. Yet another part feared that no achievement would ever be enough to change his mind. By my 30th birthday, I had achieved a rank that even my father would have been forced to respect. The irony was that the classified nature of my work meant I could not share this accomplishment with him or anyone outside my command structure. My mother sent a birthday card with her usual gentle encouragement, unaware her son now commanded operations that appeared in redacted briefings to the Joint Chiefs. The isolation took its toll. Success without recognition created a peculiar emptiness. My apartment remained sparsely furnished, despite my comfortable salary. I dated occasionally, but avoided serious relationships, knowing the security complications and emotional unavailability my career created. Commander Jackson, now General Jackson, remained one of the few constants in my increasingly compartmentalized life. Then came the invitation to my father's retirement ceremony. The embossed card arrived at my civilian address, likely sent by my mother. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Anderson would be retiring after 30 years of service. Family was expected to attend. The formal dinner would include his entire command structure and several general staff members. I placed the invitation on my desk, staring at it for several days before responding. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself from the inevitable comparisons and disappointment. Another part recognized this might be the last opportunity to resolve something that had shadowed my life for so long. In the end, I RSVP'd affirmatively, but made a decision that would ultimately change everything. I would attend as myself, without uniform or indication of rank. After years of separation, my father would have one last chance to see me as a person, not as a rank or a disappointment, before learning the truth about the career path he had so thoroughly dismissed. The invitation to my father's retirement party triggered an internal debate that kept me awake for several nights. My rational mind constructed convincing arguments against attending: the history of public criticism, the emotional toll, the inevitable awkwardness. Yet something deeper pulled me toward this confrontation with my past. Perhaps it was hope for resolution, or simply the need to close this chapter properly. My deliberation ended with a phone call from my mother. Her voice, softer with age but still carrying that gentle authority, cut through my defenses. "Corey, I know things between you and your father have been difficult," she began, careful as always. "But this is an important milestone for our family. Your presence would mean a great deal." "Would it, Mom?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. Dad has made his opinion of my career choices very clear over the years. Her silence acknowledged the truth of this statement. "Then, people change, Corey. Sometimes, they need one final opportunity to show it." After our call, I made my decision. I would attend, but on my terms. As a major general in specialized operations, I had the right to wear a formal dress uniform with full decorations. The impact would be immediate and undeniable. Yet something about that approach felt wrong, like using my achievements as weapons. Instead, I decided to attend in civilian clothes. No uniform, no visible rank, nothing that would reveal my position until necessary. This choice meant facing my father's likely dismissal one more time, but it would give him one last chance to see me as his son, not as a military disappointment or success. The next challenge was selecting appropriate attire. My closet contained primarily uniforms and casual clothes, with little in between. Military efficiency had shaped my civilian life as well, leaving little room for formality outside of uniform. A shopping trip became necessary, another rare venture into ordinary civilian activities. At the department store, I found myself staring blankly at suit options, overthinking each selection. Would a blue suit seem too casual? Would black appear too formal or funereal? A salesperson eventually rescued me, helping select a conservative gray suit that would be appropriate without drawing attention. "Special occasion?" she asked while marking alterations. "Family event," I replied vaguely. Long overdue. The travel arrangements to my hometown felt like planning a tactical operation. I scheduled my flight to arrive with minimal time for extended family interaction before the event. The hotel reservation was strategically located between the airport and the venue, avoiding any obligation to stay at the family home. Each decision was calculated to minimize emotional exposure while fulfilling my obligation to attend. 3 days before the event, I stood in my apartment, looking at the suit hanging on my closet door. The civilian clothes represented vulnerability I rarely allowed myself to feel. In uniform, my identity and authority were clear. Without it, I would face my father as just Corey, the son who had disappointed him, with no visible evidence of my success. The morning before my departure, I received an unexpected call from an unknown local number. The voice on the other end immediately transported me back 20 years. "Corey Anderson? It is you. I saw your name on the attendance list for the colonel's retirement. Man, it has been forever." Ryan Wilson had been our neighbor on base during my high school years, his father serving in my dad's unit. We had been friends despite my father's disapproval of Ryan's casual attitude toward military tradition. "Ryan, good to hear your voice," I responded, genuinely pleased despite the complication. "You still in the area?" "Never left. Followed my dad into service but went civil engineering instead of combat units." "Your old man never quite forgave me for that career choice," he laughed. "We should grab a drink while you are in town. What are you up to these days? Still in uniform?" The innocent question required careful navigation. "Still serving, yes. Nothing exciting. Well, we need pencil pushers too, right? That is what your dad always said about support roles, Ryan continued, unwittingly echoing my father's dismissal. Anyway, looking forward to catching up tomorrow. After ending the call, I sat heavily on my couch. If Ryan's perception reflected the general understanding of my career, tomorrow would be even more uncomfortable than anticipated. My father had apparently continued to minimize my military path to anyone who would listen. That evening, I called the one person who fully understood my situation, Captain Thomas Roberts. Now, one of my most trusted staff officers. "Sir, with respect, why put yourself through this?" he asked after I explained the upcoming event. "Unfinished business," I replied. "Some conflicts need resolution, even painful ones. And if the colonel continues to belittle your service, then I will have my answer and can finally close this chapter completely." The morning of the party arrived with military promptness. I woke before my alarm, body conditioned by years of discipline. The hotel room was generically comfortable, a neutral space between my worlds. As I knotted my tie with practiced precision, I rehearsed restraint for the evening ahead. Whatever happened, I would maintain control and dignity. Looking in the mirror, I saw a man my father might not even recognize. 12 years had passed since our last in-person meeting. My face had hardened with responsibility and classified operations. Only my eyes remained the same, still carrying that questioning look that had so frustrated him during my youth. One last mission, I told my reflection. Straightening my jacket. Reconnaissance only. No engagement, unless necessary. With that final preparation, I headed toward a confrontation, years in the making. Uncertain whether I was walking toward resolution or merely confirming what I already knew, that some divides cannot be bridged, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. The venue for my father's retirement celebration broadcast his self-image more clearly than any words could have. The grand ballroom of the Lancaster Hotel represented the pinnacle of local elegance, with crystal chandeliers and military decorations strategically placed to emphasize tradition and hierarchy. As I handed my keys to the valet, I noted the collection of staff cars, with officer insignia, parked prominently near the entrance. Inside the lobby, a professionally printed sign directed guests to Lieutenant Colonel Harold Anderson's retirement ceremony and dinner. The poster featured a younger version of my father in full dress uniform, medals prominently displayed. I paused briefly, struck by the realization that the man in the photo had existed primarily in my childhood memories for over a decade. The registration table was manned by junior officers from my father's command. They checked my name with professional courtesy, giving no indication they recognized it or knew my actual rank. One young lieutenant handed me a name tag that read simply Corey Anderson, family. The designation felt both accurate and profoundly insufficient. The ballroom hummed with pre-dinner conversation, filled with dress uniforms and formal attire. I scanned the room automatically, years of training making me catalog exits, officer ranks, and security positions without conscious effort. Several generals were already present, clustered near the front of the room. With a jolt, I recognized General Thompson, my father's commanding officer, and, ironically, someone who had read my classified briefings without knowing my connection to Harold Anderson. Before I could determine how to avoid that potentially complicated encounter, my mother's voice broke through the background noise. "Corey, you came." Her genuine delight made me instantly regret the years of limited contact. While my issues were with my father, she had become collateral damage in our estrangement. She embraced me warmly, pulling back to examine my face. "You look so distinguished now." The years have been good to you. You look wonderful too, Mom, I replied honestly. Despite the evident new lines of age, she maintained the graceful presence that had always been her hallmark. Your father will be so pleased you made it, she said, with what I recognized as wishful thinking rather than conviction. He is just finishing greeting some senior officers. Come say hello to your brother and sister first. She guided me through the crowd toward a corner where James stood resplendent in his uniform, captain bars gleaming on his shoulders. Beside him, Amanda wore her medical corps dress uniform with evident pride. They were deep in conversation with relatives and colleagues, clearly comfortable in this military social setting in a way I had never been. Look who arrived, Mom announced as we approached. James turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before his face settled into cautious welcome. Corey. Been a while. Good to see you, James. I extended my hand, which he shook firmly. Major promotion coming up next year, he informed me without preamble. Dad has been talking to some people about fast-tracking it. The implied comparison hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, Amanda stepped forward with a warmer greeting. Ignore him, Corey. He still thinks everything is a competition. She hugged me briefly. How is Washington treating you? Still in that strategic planning office? Still there, I answered truthfully, if incompletely. Keeping busy. I am sure you are, she replied kindly. Not everyone is cut out for field command. The military needs all types. Her well-intentioned comment revealed how thoroughly my father had shaped their perception of my career. Rather than correct her misconception, I simply nodded and steered the conversation toward her recent deployment. As Amanda described her medical unit's work, I observed my father across the room. He stood tall among a group of officers, holding court as he had throughout my childhood. Despite being shorter than many present, his commanding presence made him the center of attention. His laugh carried across the room, confident and full, the laugh of a man who believed he had earned every accolade coming his way. His gaze swept the room and briefly crossed mine. A flicker of recognition, followed by the barest nod of acknowledgement. Then he returned to his conversation without breaking stride. The minimum courtesy afforded a distant acquaintance, not a son. The interaction did not go unnoticed by our relatives. Aunt Judith, my mother's sister, approached with sympathetic eyes. He will come around, Corey. He is just busy with all the brass tonight. Of course, I replied automatically. It is his night. For the next half hour, I navigated conversations with extended family members, most of whom knew little about my actual life. They asked surface-level questions about Washington, D.C., and made assumptions about my work that I neither confirmed nor corrected. Each interaction reinforced my outsider status within my own family circle. So you push papers for the strategy guys? My Uncle Bill asked bluntly. Drink in hand. Never understood why you did not go combat arms like your dad and brother. Andersons always led from the front. Different times required different approaches. I replied neutrally. If you say so, he chuckled. Hard to get promoted that way though, right? James is on the fast track to major already. As the mingling period continued, I noticed several senior officers giving me curious glances. One colonel did a visible double take when he passed nearby, clearly trying to place my face. I strategically moved to less populated areas of the room, avoiding direct contact with anyone who might recognize me from classified briefings or secure communications. This careful avoidance became more difficult as I overheard my father regaling junior officers with stories from his career, many subtly embellished beyond recognition. He described operations where his role had been peripheral, as though he had been central to their success. Most troubling were his revisionist accounts of tactical decisions, where he claimed credit for approaches he had actively opposed at the time, some of which I knew the actual origins of all too well. Of course, the traditional approach proved most effective, he told an attentive group of lieutenants. These newfangled strategic theories look good on paper, but fall apart in real combat situations. Remember that as you advance your careers. The irony of his statement, given that several of those newfangled theories had come from operations I had directed, created a surreal moment. Here was my father, celebrating a career defined by rigid adherence to tradition, unknowingly dismissing the innovations of his own son. As dinner approached and guests began moving toward assigned tables, I made a quiet decision. After the meal, before the speeches and formalities began, I would discreetly depart. I had fulfilled my family obligation by attending, and continuing to witness my father's distorted narrative would serve no constructive purpose. This resolution brought immediate relief, a sensation of control regained in an uncomfortable situation. Little did I know that events would unfold very differently, and that my careful plan for a quiet exit would be shattered by a public confrontation I had spent years avoiding. The formal dinner portion of the evening proceeded with military precision. Each course arrived and departed on schedule, conversations flowing around me as I maintained a carefully neutral expression. I was seated at the family table, but positioned at the far end, away from my father and the distinguished guests nearest him. The physical distance mirrored the emotional reality between us. Throughout the meal, I noticed my mother glancing anxiously between my father and me, clearly hoping for some reconciliation that seemed increasingly unlikely. My siblings alternated between attempts at including me in conversation and showcasing their own achievements to nearby senior officers. The patterns established in childhood played out with adult variations. As dessert was served, the master of ceremonies approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the formal portion of this evening's celebration. Please welcome Colonel Davis, who will introduce our guest of honor. Colonel Davis, a florid man with an enthusiastic speaking style, offered a predictably glowing introduction filled with superlatives about my father's service. Most were standard retirement ceremony exaggerations, though several claims about tactical innovations made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. Finally, my father rose to thunderous applause and took his position at the podium. He cut an impressive figure in his dress uniform, medals and ribbons capturing the light. His posture remained parade ground perfect despite his age, a physical discipline he had maintained throughout his career. Distinguished guests, fellow officers, friends and family, he began, voice projecting clearly across the silent room. 30 years ago, I took an oath to serve this great nation. Today, as I prepare to retire from active duty, I can say without reservation that every day of that service has been an honor. The standard opening gave way to anecdotes from his career, carefully selected to emphasize his leadership and traditional military values. He spoke about challenges overcome through discipline and respect for chain of command. The narrative he constructed portrayed himself as the quintessential officer, embodying every virtue the service manual described. As his speech continued, I noticed a subtle shift in tone when he began acknowledging those who had supported his career. He thanked his commanding officers with appropriate deference, his peers with professional courtesy, and his subordinates with calculated generosity. Then he turned to family acknowledgments. No military career exists in isolation. Behind every officer stands a family who serves in their own way. He gestured toward our table. My wife, Sarah, has been the foundation that allowed me to focus on duty. Her support never wavered through deployments relocations, and the demands of command. My mother received warm applause as she smiled graciously. Years of playing the perfect military spouse, evident in her composed acknowledgement. I have also been blessed with children who understood the importance of the Anderson military legacy, my father continued. My son James followed the proud tradition of combat leadership and continues to rise through the ranks on merit and determination. James stood briefly, acknowledging the applause with a confident nod. My daughter Amanda chose to serve through the medical corps, saving lives and demonstrating that compassion and duty are not mutually exclusive. Amanda rose more modestly, smiling as the room applauded her service. The moment I had been dreading arrived, as my father paused, his gaze finally turning toward my position at the far end of the family table. A subtle shift in his expression signaled the change in tone before his words confirmed it. Family means accepting all members, even when their choices differ from our hopes, he began, voice taking on a patronizing quality that set my teeth on edge. My son Corey chose a different path, preferring the safety of offices over the challenges of real leadership. An uncomfortable stillness fell over the room as the public criticism registered with the guests. Professional military courtesy typically prevented such direct disparagement, even in family contexts. I am told he pushes papers somewhere in the Pentagon bureaucracy, my father continued, a dismissive smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Some sort of analysis role suitable for his temperament. Each word landed like a physical blow. Despite years of similar comments in private, the public nature of this dismissal created an entirely new level of humiliation. I maintained eye contact with my father, refusing to show the impact of his words, even as I felt color rising in my face. Then came the final cut, delivered with casual cruelty. In fact, Corey, you might want to consider leaving before the technical portions of tonight's proceedings. I would hate for you to be embarrassed among so many distinguished combat leaders when we discuss actual military matters. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several officers looked down at their plates, uncomfortable with the breach of professional courtesy. My mother's face registered shock, then pain, her hand half raised as if to intervene across the distance between us. The moment stretched into uncomfortable silence as all eyes turned toward me, waiting for my reaction. With deliberate calmness, I placed my napkin beside my plate and rose from my chair. Military discipline had taught me to compartmentalize emotion, a skill that served me well in this moment of public shaming. "Congratulations on your retirement, sir," I said, voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. "I wish you well." The formal words carried no anger, no defensiveness, simply professional courtesy that highlighted by contrast the inappropriateness of his attack. I turned to leave, dignity intact, despite the burning sense of injustice. As I moved toward the exit, my path took me past several senior officers' tables. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on maintaining composed movements despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. 3 more steps, and I would reach the side door, escaping this final, public confirmation that my father would never see beyond his narrow definition of military success. "Wait a moment." A commanding voice cut through the uncomfortable silence. "Corey Anderson?" I turned reflexively toward the speaker. General Thompson had risen from his seat, looking at me with an expression of confused recognition. "Yes, sir?" I responded automatically, the ingrained respect for rank overriding my desire for a quick departure. General Thompson stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he studied my face more carefully. Recognition dawned fully in his expression, followed immediately by confusion as he glanced between me and my father. "Are you?" He hesitated, visibly recalibrating his understanding of the situation. Major General Anderson from Strategic Operations Command. The question landed like a thunderclap in the silent room. My father, still standing at the podium, froze mid-gesture. The microphone captured his audible intake of breath, broadcasting it throughout the ballroom. The moment of truth had arrived through no action of my own. Years of maintaining separate worlds had collapsed in an instant of unplanned recognition. The decision now was how to respond, whether to confirm my identity or maintain the separation a final time. Looking at my father's shocked expression, I made my choice. Yes, General Thompson, I replied clearly. I am. General Thompson's question hung in the air as the entire room processed its implications. The disconnect between my father's characterization of my career and the reality represented by my actual rank created a cognitive dissonance visible on every face. Major General? My father repeated into the still active microphone, the words emerging strangled and disbelieving. There must be some mistake. General Thompson, recovering his composure, straightened to attention. No mistake at all. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, I have received numerous briefings from the General, though I had no idea he was your son. The resemblance is clear now that I see you together. Other senior officers in the room began murmuring in recognition. A brigadier general from the intelligence division stood, offering me a respectful nod. General Anderson, your guidance during the Meridian operation was invaluable. An honor to see you in person, sir. The cascade of recognition spread through the room as more officers made the connection between my name and position. Several junior officers who had been dismissive earlier now looked stricken, mentally reviewing their previous interactions for any accidental disrespect. My mother's hand covered her mouth, eyes wide with shock and dawning pride. James sat rigidly in his chair, expression unreadable, as he processed the revelation that his supposedly underachieving brother outranked him by several grades. Amanda showed less surprise. A thoughtful look, suggesting she might have harbored suspicions about my vague descriptions of work. My father remained frozen at the podium, microphone still capturing his uneven breathing. His face cycled through emotions: disbelief, confusion, embarrassment, and something harder to identify. The carefully constructed narrative of his career and family was publicly unraveling in real time. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, General Thompson continued, addressing my father while looking at me with new understanding. Your son has been instrumental in developing the strategic approaches that have redefined modern military operations. His unconventional thinking has saved countless lives and resources. Each word visibly impacted my father like physical blows. The very qualities he had dismissed throughout my youth and career were now being praised by his superior officer. Finding his voice, my father attempted to recover. I was aware of Corey's position, of course. Security protocols prevented any public acknowledgement. The transparent falsehood hung awkwardly in the air. General Thompson raised a skeptical eyebrow, but diplomatically chose not to contradict a retiring officer at his own ceremony. Then you must be tremendously proud, he replied, allowing my father a thin veneer of dignity. Your son has received commendations that remain classified, but rest assured, reflect the highest traditions of service. The moment demanded a decision from me. I could allow my father's fiction to stand, giving him an escape from public embarrassment, or I could correct the record. The years of dismissal and culminating in tonight's public humiliation pulled me toward the latter. Yet military discipline, and perhaps something more fundamental, a weariness with conflict, guided me toward restraint. Thank you, General Thompson. I said, addressing him directly, but pitching my voice to carry. My father instilled in me the importance of service to country above personal recognition. The classified nature of my work has made family discussions challenging over the years. The diplomatic response offered everyone a pathway forward. My father visibly seized on this lifeline, nodding as though this explained everything. Exactly so, he said quickly. Family security is paramount. An uncomfortable silence followed, the audience sensing the underlying currents despite the surface reconciliation. The master of ceremonies, demonstrating the quick thinking that marked a successful military career, stepped forward. What an unexpected and wonderful revelation for Lieutenant Colonel Anderson's retirement celebration, he announced smoothly. The Anderson family tradition of service clearly continues in remarkable ways. Ander 7. What an unexpected. Let us continue with our program after this brief intermission. As the formal portion of the evening paused, the room erupted in conversation. Junior officers who had been seated near me suddenly found reasons to introduce themselves. Senior officers approached with collegial greetings that would have been unthinkable 30 minutes earlier. The transformation was both validating and vaguely unsettling in its transparency. My mother reached me first, eyes brimming with emotion. Major General? Corey, why did you never tell us? Much of my work is classified, Mom, I explained gently. And the rest became complicated for reasons that were not entirely about security. Her expression showed understanding of the unspoken family dynamics. He was so hard on you, always pushing his vision rather than seeing yours. That is in the past now, I replied. Though we both knew resolution would be more complex than this moment of revelation. James approached next, his earlier confidence replaced with visible recalibration of our relationship. General, he began formally, then caught himself. Corey, this is unexpected. James, nothing has changed about who I am, I said, extending my hand. The work is just work, classified or not. He shook my hand with newfound respect that bordered on discomfort. All those years, Dad was saying, you would never advance beyond desk work. He believed what he could see, I replied simply, and I could not show him otherwise. Amanda's approach was warmer, with a knowing smile that suggested less surprise than the others. I always wondered why someone with your strategic mind would be content with a low-level position. The classification explained so much. You suspected? I asked, surprised by her perception. Not your actual rank, she clarified, but that your vague descriptions were covering something significant. Medical Corps teaches observation skills, too. The most difficult encounter loomed as my father made his way toward our growing family circle. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by an uncertain posture I had never before witnessed in him. For the first time in my memory, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Anderson appeared unsure of his footing. He stopped before me, military bearing reasserting itself through sheer force of habit. For a suspended moment, neither of us spoke, decades of misunderstanding creating a gulf that mere words seemed inadequate to bridge. Corey, he finally began, voice uncharacteristically subdued. I was unaware of the extent of your advancement, not an apology, but perhaps as close as his nature would allow. I recognized the enormous effort this admission of ignorance cost a man who had built his identity on certainty and authority. Security limitations are real, I offered, providing the explanation that would allow him to save face publicly. My work does not permit much disclosure. He nodded, seizing this explanation eagerly. Of course. Completely understandable. Then, more loudly for nearby listeners, strategic operations has always been vital to national security. The Anderson family has contributed at all levels of service. The revision of history was already beginning, his narrative adjusting to incorporate this new information while preserving his central role. It was simultaneously frustrating and utterly predictable. Perhaps after your retirement, we can discuss the non-classified aspects of our respective careers, I suggested, offering a potential path forward rather than dwelling on past misconceptions. I would welcome that, he replied, a genuine flash of interest breaking through his discomfort. Very appropriate to pass institutional knowledge between generations of officers. With that tentative reconnection established, the formal program resumed. The remainder of my father's speech contained no further references to my supposed underachievement. Instead, he emphasized family legacy and service in general terms, avoiding specifics that might highlight his previous mischaracterizations. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, I observed a subtle but significant shift in the room's dynamics. My father, so long the center of attention and authority in family gatherings, found himself eclipsed as senior officers gravitated toward conversations with me. Though I kept these interactions brief and deflected classified inquiries, the change in status was unmistakable to everyone present, most especially to the man who had built his identity on military hierarchy. The revelation had altered the narrative permanently, creating a new reality that all of us would need to navigate in the coming days and years. As coffee was served and the formal proceedings concluded, I prepared for the more difficult private conversations that would inevitably follow this public unveiling of truth. The formal portion of the retirement ceremony concluded with standard military precision. Guests began departing in waves, offering final congratulations to my father and, increasingly, deferential acknowledgments to me. When the ballroom had emptied of all but immediate family and close associates, my father approached me with determined purpose. "We should speak privately," he said, gesturing toward a small meeting room adjacent to the main hall. I followed him into the room, noting how his posture had changed throughout the evening. The rigid military bearing remained, but something in his shoulders had shifted, as though an invisible weight had been redistributed. He closed the door behind us, creating a bubble of silence after the social noise of the main event. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The carefully maintained distance of years created an unfamiliar awkwardness between two men accustomed to clarity of purpose, if not understanding. "Your actual rank," he finally began, "Major General. At your age, that is remarkable." "Thank you," I replied simply. "How long?" he asked, and I understood the question encompassed both my rank and the deception. 3 years at current rank. The progression began shortly after we lost regular contact. He processed this information, calculating backwards through our limited interactions. "All those times I assumed you were stalled in your career. You had limited information," I acknowledged neutrally. "Why maintain the fiction?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Any father would be proud of such advancement. The question revealed the fundamental disconnect that had defined our relationship. Even now, he viewed my achievement primarily through the lens of rank and external validation, rather than personal fulfillment or mission effectiveness. Initially, security concerns were genuine, I explained carefully. Later, the pattern was established. Breaking it would have required explanations that seemed unnecessary given the nature of our relationship. His flinch at this assessment was subtle but visible. "I always wanted what was best for your career. You wanted what you believed was best," I corrected gently. "There is a difference." The distinction hung between us, encompassing decades of misunderstanding. My father moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot where guests continued to depart. His reflection in the glass showed an expression I had rarely seen. Uncertainty. I may have been overly committed to a particular vision of military success, he conceded. The words clearly difficult for him, coming from a man who had never admitted error in my memory. This qualified acknowledgement represented significant movement. I recognized the effort it required and chose to meet it with equal honesty, and I could have found better ways to help you understand my path without compromising security, I offered. Estrangement was not inevitable. He turned from the window, studying me with new attention. Your approach to strategic problems. That was evident even when you were young. I mistook it for insubordination. Different perspectives have value in different contexts, I replied. Traditional and innovative approaches both serve necessary functions. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Diplomatic answer. Political skills must serve you well at your level of command. This moment of genuine connection, however small, created an opening for reconciliation that had seemed impossible hours earlier. Neither of us was prone to emotional declarations, but the shift toward mutual recognition was tangible. Our conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. My mother entered, her intuitive sense of timing perfect as always. She had given us space for initial connection, while ensuring the separation did not extend too long. The staff need access to all rooms for cleanup, she explained, though we all recognized the pretext. Perhaps we should continue this conversation tomorrow. Corey will join us for brunch at the house, my father stated, the automatic command tone slipping back into his voice before he caught himself. That is, if your schedule permits. I can adjust my return flight, I replied, accepting both the invitation and the effort behind it. As we rejoined the remaining family members in the main hall, my mother pulled me aside, her eyes still reflecting lingering emotion from the evening's revelations. All these years, she began, her voice wavering slightly. I knew you were accomplished, but never imagined. I should have asked more questions, pushed harder, to understand. You were navigating a difficult position, Mom, I assured her. Between father and son, between security limitations and family connection. You did your best with the information available. I let his dismissal of your path go unchallenged too often, she admitted. It was easier than confrontation, and I reasoned you were an adult who could fight your own battles. I should have been a better advocate. We all made choices that seemed right at the time, I said, embracing her gently. The important thing is that we have an opportunity to build something different going forward. As we prepared to leave the venue, James approached with Amanda. Their responses to the evening's revelations contrasted visibly. James maintained a formal distance, his congratulations correct but reserved. The competitive dynamic established in childhood had been disrupted but not eliminated by the revelation of my rank. This explains why my security clearance requests sometimes receive unusually quick approvals, he noted with a sidelong glance. Connections matter, even anonymous ones. The merit of the requests matters more, I corrected mildly. But perspective from different command structures can sometimes help cut through bureaucracy. Amanda's approach was warmer, with genuine interest, rather than comparison. The strategic initiatives from your division have transformed our medical deployment protocols. I never connected those changes to my own brother. The integration of medical resources into strategic planning was actually inspired by some of your early research papers, I told her, enjoying her surprise at this acknowledgement. Innovations rarely occur in isolation. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, General Thompson approached for a final word. His earlier shock had transformed into professional appreciation. Anderson, he addressed me directly, your father and I have served together for 15 years. Not once did he mention his son was the same General Anderson, whose briefings have guided half our current operational doctrine. Family and operational security maintain separate boundaries. General. I replied diplomatically, "Indeed." His knowing look suggested he understood the personal dynamics at play. "Your presence at tomorrow's command transition breakfast would be welcome. Officially. As yourself. Thank you, sir. I will be there." This public acknowledgement from my father's commanding officer represented more than professional courtesy. It was an invitation to reclaim my full identity within the family context, to integrate the separate worlds I had maintained for so long. The following morning brought cautious new beginnings. Brunch at my parents' home featured careful conversations about non-classified aspects of my work, my father alternating between genuine interest and thinly disguised regret for his previous dismissal. My mother observed our interaction with hopeful attention, occasionally steering topics toward safer ground when tensions threatened to rise. In the weeks and months that followed, our family relationships underwent gradual recalibration. My father, retired from active service, but still deeply connected to military identity, made visible efforts to understand my strategic focus. I recognized these attempts as significant, given his lifelong commitment to traditional approaches. Our conversations remained formal by some family standards, professional respect gradually laying groundwork for more personal connection. Complete reconciliation would require more time and mutual accommodation than a single revelation could provide. But the foundation was being established conversation by conversation. James eventually moved past his initial discomfort, our relationship evolving into one of professional colleagues with familial connection rather than competitors for paternal approval. Amanda and I discovered unexpected professional synergies between her medical research and my strategic planning, creating a collaborative relationship that transcended our childhood roles. The most profound change occurred internally. For years, I had carried the weight of my father's disapproval, alongside the classified burdens of command. The separation between professional achievement and personal recognition had created a disconnect in my own life experience. As these worlds began to integrate, I found unexpected liberation in wholeness. Looking back from the perspective of time, the public revelation at my father's retirement party represented a painful but necessary breaking point. Sometimes old patterns require disruption before new connections can form. The humiliation that preceded recognition ultimately opened a path toward mutual understanding that might otherwise have remained closed. The greatest lesson emerged not from tactical innovation or strategic planning, but from the fundamental human challenge of reconciling different perspectives. My father and I had viewed military service through different lenses, both valid in their contexts but seemingly incompatible when forced into competition. Accepting this plurality of approaches created space for respect that perfectionism and rigid expectations had prevented. True strength, I discovered, lies not in forcing others to acknowledge your path, but in walking it with integrity, regardless of external validation. The recognition, when it finally came, mattered less than the journey itself. The insights gained through navigating family complexity ultimately informed my leadership approach more profoundly than any tactical training could have provided. Life rarely offers perfect resolution to long-standing conflicts. My relationship with my father continues to evolve, with occasional retreats into old patterns alongside genuine moments of connection. The difference now is that we both recognize the pattern when it emerges, creating the possibility of choosing a different response. Have you ever had someone important in your life completely misunderstand your path until a moment of unexpected revelation changed everything? What did that teach you about the relationship between external validation and personal integrity? Share your experience in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes, the greatest victory is not proving others wrong, but finding peace with your own journey, regardless of their understanding. Thank you for listening to my story.